Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. This is Brown at I Have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the movie Ricochet on DVD. So, Ricochet came out in 1991, and it was the fourth movie directed by Russell Mulcahy, and it starred Denzel Washington and John Lithgow. So, Ricochet is a movie that I saw a long time ago, back when I was living with my folks, and at the time, I didn't really think much of it. I mean, there were a couple things I liked about the movie, but I thought that it was something that was very over the top and just not that good. But fast forward sometime later to where I'm doing movie reviews and I'm on a bit of a Russell Mulcahy kick, and I figured that since Ricochet is considered something of a highlight in Russell Mulcahy's career, I decided, okay, may as well rewatch it and for the purpose of doing a review, right? And so I found the copy over at Movie Train Company that was, for dirt cheap, and so, I got it, and I figured worst case scenario, I got something to add to the Russell Mulcahy library. But I was pleasantly surprised that on the second time around, this was actually a good movie. And so I think what happened was, the first time I watched it, there were certain things about the movie that maybe I was too young to understand, or I didn't have enough life experience to appreciate certain aspects of the movie. And so fast forward several years later when I'm older and I've seen a bit more in life and have a bit more, I guess you could say, of a varied perspective on things. I think that there were the things that went over my head the first time around, I recognized and appreciated the second time around. So, I mean, that being said, there are problems with the movie. For instance, there are a couple of elements of the movie that are over the top, and there are parts of the movie where you're kind of like, there's no way that would happen in real life, or that's not how it would go down in real life. But that being said, you have Denzel Washington and John Lithgow bringing their A games to the table, and as a result, you have a movie that's flawed, but nonetheless elevated to a legitimately good movie. So it's also something that's a bit of a turning point in the careers of some of the people involved in the movie. You got Denzel Washington, who was trying to branch out and show, just what kind of acting he could do, and his versatility as an actor is definitely on hand here. And from here, he went on to do a whole bunch of other highly acclaimed work. And then you had John Lithgow, who was mainly known for doing sort of good guy or maybe family friendly type roles. For example, I remember him personally from the movies 2010, The Year We Made Contact, which was a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then you had him in a movie called Distant Thunder, which I thought was a pretty good movie, and he was Ralph Macchio's father in that one. And so he was definitely more of a good guy type of actor that I was familiar with. But I also know he was in the movie Harry and the Hendersons, which I've never seen, but I know that it's got a pretty big fan base, and it's definitely more of a family-friendly comedy. And so, people who are more familiar with him in, say, good guy roles or family-friendly type roles, you see him in this movie, and you're like, damn. You did. Like me personally, I had seen him in the Sylvester Stallone movie Cliffhanger, so I knew that he could play a bad guy. But here in Ricochet, he is chillingly evil, and so this was definitely something that I think showed just how versatile of an actor that John Lithgow was. But I think it was also kind of a turning point for the actor Ice-T, because at this point in time, the one other movie I think he had been in, or at least had a lead role in, or a major part in, was the movie New Jack City, which is a really good crime drama, and I would highly recommend it. But Here, though, he has a supporting role, and he's not in the movie as much as, say, some of the other actors that are prominently billed in this movie. But when he's on screen, he does manage to hold his own. So, you got New Jack City, and then you got Ricochet, showing that this guy could act. And so, and I think that in some ways you could argue it was kind of a turning point for Russell Mulcahy as well, because he was mainly known for directing groundbreaking music videos, and he had also done two really cool movies that were Razorback and the first Highlander movie. But unfortunately, his third movie, Highlander 2, was something that was kind of a dent in his career. I mean, I've already reviewed that particular movie, but it was a pretty bad movie. And it, the people that were involved in it, they were all like, yeah, this was a stinker, and so Ricochet was something that allowed Russell Mulcahy, I think, to bounce back and show that, he wasn't done. He still had some tricks up his sleeve. And so you see a movie like Highlander, and I mean, yes, that is you could argue an urban fantasy movie, but it did show that Russell Mulcahy was good at working with a gritty urban environment, and he showed that he still had it in him to do so with Ricochet. And so with Ricochet, he showed that he still had it in him to make a good movie. And so from there, his career continued to flourish. And I mean, to be fair, there were some ups and downs, but his ups, when he's on, he's on. So okay, so the story of the movie, it starts off in the 80s, and you have the character of Nick Stiles, played by Denzel Washington, and his friend, Larry, played by Kevin Pollak, who are both police officers, and they're partners too. And one night there's this festival in the city, and they're on duty, just doing security, and at the same time there's a hitman named Earl Talbot Blake and his accomplice, a guy named Kim, and the two of them are working together, to basically screw over the people that hired them. And so basically there's this drug deal wherein one of the people involved hired Earl Talbot Blake to come in at a certain time and kill all the other people in the room, so that way he could get all the money and the drugs. But Blake basically comes in and kills everyone, including the guy who hired him. And so basically he gets the money and the drugs, and he's wanting to start his own career as kind of a self-made man in, I guess you could say, the hitman business. But in the process, though, the gunfire draws the attention of Nick and Larry, because while there's a bunch of noise in this festival, it's like a carnival and everything, they just happen to be near enough to the building where the drug deal was going down, and so they happen to hear the gunfire, and as a result, they're able to apprehend both Blake and Kim. And so while Larry captures Kim, Blake is apprehended by Nick. And the way it's done is, Nick manages to wound Blake, by shooting him in the knee, and as a result, Blake's incapacitated. And this is all caught on a camcorder, because there's this guy who's making a family video of his family at the carnival and what have you. And this video manages to find its way to multiple news outlets. And so you have this this, I guess you could say, aspiring police officer who, has his career take off overnight, because, the city is kind of in need for, I guess you could say, a good face in the police publicity department. And so, they see, this thing kind of delivered to them on a silver platter, and the DA, manages to, hire Nick and Larry and promote them, and as a result, they both make detective, and so, their careers take off, and Blake's, on the other hand, is ruined, and he spends several years in jail, basically stewing over, how his life is, more or less ruined by this, young, police officer. And so while Blake's in prison, Nick's, life and career take off, and he goes from, police officer to detective, and eventually he becomes a district attorney, and, a very high profile one. And he also has a wife and 2 daughters. And so, his life has prospered, whereas Blake's has basically just, been demolished. And so, Blake, this whole time he's been in prison, he's obsessing over getting revenge on Nick Stiles, and he hatches this elaborate scheme, where his partner Kim, the one who was arrested with him, manages to make parole before him, and does some favors for him on the outside. And in prison, Blake forms an alliance with the Aryan Brotherhood, and he works with members of them to make this dramatic escape at his parole hearing. And basically there's a really high body count, but Blake and one of the other members of the Aryan Brotherhood escape from the prison, after gunning their way out, and they meet up with Kim, who's on the outside, and Kim's able to supply them with certain resources, but Blake double crosses the surviving member of the Aryan Brotherhood, because what had happened was that at a certain point earlier in prison, before Kim had been paroled, on Blake's orders, he had switched Blake's dental records with that one particular member of the Aryan Brotherhood. And so after Blake kills this guy, he also shoots the guy in the knee, which would be the exact same knee that Blake himself had been shot. And so then he basically sets the guy's body on fire by way of putting him in this truck and having it go down a cliff, and the truck blows up. And so this escape attempt makes the news, but when they find the dead body, because the dental records are switched and the there's the same knee injury, the authorities are coming to the conclusion that Blake has made an escape attempt, but he was killed on the outside by members of the Aryan Brotherhood. And so for all intents and purposes, Blake's dead to the public, but he hatches this terrifying scheme to get back at Nick Stiles, the guy who put him away all those years ago. And so basically he works with Kim, his accomplice, to basically shadow Nick, and record him and things like that. And then he starts to work his way into Nick's life. Like at one point, he disguises himself as a power man, and sets up a blackout at the family's household. And so while Nick and his wife Alice are at a fundraiser, he comes over to the family's house and drugs the babysitter while he's in disguise as a power man, and he puts like a recording device in the family's home and what have you. And just some really disturbing things like that. But then he and Kim also they murder one of Nick's friends, and also one of his who also happens to be a coworker, and make it look like that this guy and Nick had not only embezzled city funds, which were being used to rebuild this tower that they were wanting to use as a youth outreach center, but they made it look like that this guy was not only embezzling funds but was a child molester too, and so and as a result, this is making it look like Nick was involved in the same thing, and so Nick's like, I knew this guy. There was no way he would do this. As in his friend, the one who was found dead by way of suicide, and with all this nasty stuff on him. But basically, the people that were originally pulling for him, like his political friends and what have you, they're all like, okay. They basically do an about face on Nick and start grilling him, and they start interrogating him, and they don't trust him anymore, because Blake's schemes, they start to make it look like Nick's more and more guilty, and then Blake really steps things up, where he kidnaps Nick and holds him captive for several days, and gets him hooked on cocaine and heroin, and also does something really nasty to him, which I won't say for the sake of spoiling things, but basically they let Nick go, but not only does Nick have all these drugs in his system, but when he's found by the authorities, he's trying to convince his wife and his his friends or his colleagues in the legal department, as well as the police department, that he was kidnapped by Blake, and everyone's saying Blake's dead, and he's trying to say, no, Blake's not dead. He kidnapped me and he did these things to me, and he's the one who's making it look like I'm involved in all these things. But basically Blake just turns his life upside down. So you have Nick, who's an upstanding guy, gradually being gaslit into just losing his mind, because he can't convince his family, he can't convince his friends, he can't convince his colleagues that he's being set up, because as far as they're concerned, Blake's dead. And so it's looking like Nick himself is involved in some shady things. And so this is actually a pretty this was a movie that surprised me the second time around, because I saw just how, not only how good of an actor both Denzel Washington and John Lithgow were, but just you really feel sorry for the character of Nick, because Denzel Washington, he's sort of like, he's really good at playing someone who's an upstanding individual. Like, he's good at playing good guys. And so when you have someone who is on screen, a convincing, morally upright character, basically having their lives ruined, by, someone who, they're trying to convince, the world that, hey, this is the guy who's doing it, and he's not dead, he's alive. And he can't convince anyone of this. And you see Denzel Washington, play this, character, who, he had both feet on the ground, and he was a sane, rational individual, but then, when Blake starts messing with his mind, you really see Denzel Washington do a wonderful job of playing a character who's gradually becoming unhinged. And so, and also gotta give credit to, the actors who are playing, the people that, you know, are in his circle, if you will, like, his family or his, friends and colleagues, because, you see how some of them are, wanting to, believe him, or at least they're wanting to believe that something happened, but at the same time, they're having a hard time believing that, it's this dead guy who's, doing all this to him, or like, I should say, this guy who's supposed to be dead doing all this to him. And you also see how fake some of the people are, I guess, in the political side of things, because some of these guys, or some of these people who supposedly had his back, as soon as there's an opportunity, they start stabbing him in the back, for the sake of political gain and what have you. And so there's a lot of intricate stuff involved here. But also, I liked, I liked Denzel's chemistry with Kevin Pollak, because, like, when you see them working together, whether it be when they're just up and coming police officers, or detectives, or just old friends and what have you. I mean, they have a really good chemistry with one another. And Kevin Pollak, I mean, he plays Larry as one of the few people who is in his corner all the way through. And I mean, he knows that something's up, but at the same time, he's not about to believe that his old friend and partner is the one who's doing all these things to himself. And so also, I liked Ice-T's character, because Ice-T plays this guy named Odessa, who's an old friend of Nick's, because back in the 80s, the two of them, they used to hang out together in the same neighborhood. But then whereas Nick went the route of law enforcement, Odessa went the route of gang leader and drug dealer. And so you have this interesting dynamic between the two of them, and you see where there's a disappointment on both of their parts with each other, because Nick's disappointed with Odessa for not rising above his circumstances and doing something positive with his life, and Odessa is disappointed with Nick for basically being I guess you could say a stooge for the white man, that kind of thing. And so it's interesting seeing that, because it's like the two of them, deep down, they do care about each other still, say years later, but at the same time, there is that lingering disappointment. And there's this kind of back and forth between them, because there are instances where they hate each other's guts, but then when certain things happen in the movie where Nick has a good reason to look Odessa up and say, hey, I need your help, you see that friendship, even though it's sort of been I guess you could say on ice for all these years, it's still there. And so I thought that Ice-T did a really good job actually playing that sort of resentment, but reluctant acknowledgement of, hey, I'm still your friend, or you're still my friend, and oddly enough, he and Denzel Washington actually had good chemistry with each other as well, which is something that I never thought I'd hear myself say. I mean, nothing against Ice-T, but usually you don't think of him as someone who can hold his own with an A-list guy like Denzel Washington, but it's like, there it is. And then we got John Lithgow. John Lithgow kills it in this movie, and he was, if anyone here was a straight up surprise, it was him, because as I mentioned, I'm more familiar with him as, say, playing someone who's more of a good guy, but seeing him here, though, he was straight up terrifying. And the people who came up with the story and the script and everything, I mean, they have a good handle on making the character scary with his dialogue and everything, as well as how the story goes. But John Lithgow brings him to life, and just whenever he's on screen, he's like this presence of, I guess you could say, focused chaos. Because, I mean, he stabs people in the back, metaphorically speaking. He kills people left and right, but there's a method, there's a reason for all this, because in his mind, I mean, his life was ruined, not by his own choices, but by this, by this guy who just happened to, turn up, as an obstacle in his life and completely uprooted everything. And so rather than, say, owning up to his own, actions and his own mistakes, I mean, he just festers in prison, and, just has enough time on his hands to not only form a grudge against Nick, but also to just, come up with this intricate and elaborate plan to get revenge on Nick and just gaslight him into going insane. And that was actually, I mean, the idea of that is pretty scary, in and of itself. I mean, just thinking about something like that happening in real life. But John Lithgow, seeing him do something like this on screen, with his character, it's pretty scary. And I mean, not quite as scary as, say, someone like the Terminator, but at the same time, this is a guy who does not stop. This is a guy who will do whatever it takes to ruin the guy's life who ruined his life. And so his motivation, I mean, even though he's a straight up bad guy, he has a motivation that makes sense, okay? But at the same time, it's scary the lengths he'll go to, to not only, get out of prison, to get to where he can set this plan in motion outside of prison, but just the fact that, he will do whatever it takes to drive Nick insane. And John Lithgow just nails it. And, one of the things that it's brought up in, say, some of the trivia information that you'll find online about the movie is that, John Lithgow does this thing where he rarely, if ever, blinks in the movie. And he was wanting to give the impression that, his character, Blake, had a glass eye. Because, one of his eyes looks, say, off, and it's an effect that works wonders, and it's like you see it in the movie, and he's already a scary enough character, but that aspect of him, it gives an almost supernatural vibe. I mean, he's not supernatural, but it does give that vibe. Like, this is a guy who is almost supernaturally evil. I mean, he's not supernatural, but at the same time, because of that, effect he has where he just doesn't blink, or at least if he does blink, I don't remember him blinking, but it's a scary effect. And yeah, and also, I thought that, the movie did a good job of, showing a character, with Nick, with Nick's character. I thought it did a good job of, showing a guy's life being turned upside down. And so and it's all the more disturbing when you see that it's a character who is an upright, morally good individual, just basically having their lives ruined by, say, an old enemy of theirs. And, you see Denzel just, go from someone who's idealistic to, unhinged and cynical. And you don't blame him for his character for that, but Denzel just does a really good job. But there are two, scenes I can think of that, respectively show, that I think, I guess you could say, stand out to me as far as, showing, just how good at, John Lithgow and Denzel are, because, for example, like there's a scene where, it's after, John and Kim have, kidnapped Nick, and he's got him, right in front of him, and, he forces Nick to arm wrestle him, and there's this monologue that he gives about how, and when I say he, I'm talking about John Lithgow. There's this monologue he has as Blake when he's talking to Nick, and while they're arm wrestling, and he's talking about how, it's, strange how, there we were all those years ago, both of us at the start of our careers, and one of us, took off and lit up the sky like a meteor. And why? Because one of us met the other. And okay, obviously I'm not as good of an actor as either of those guys, but you see the movie and you see that part, and it's a very memorable moment. And you already know Blake's motivation, but John Lithgow just gives life to it, in that scene with his monologue. And it's like, yeah, he kills it. And for Denzel, there are several moments in this movie that show him in various states of duress. But there's one particular scene where he has a videotape, right? And he's trying to show some of his colleagues that hey, I have proof that Blake's alive. And because basically Blake and Kim, they sent him a videotape showing Blake doing something very scary. I won't spoil it. And so it causes Nick to have this almost panic attack, right? And something else happens that makes him look even more insane. But he has the videotape, right? And he's showing it, and he's like, watch this. And he puts it in the VCR to show to his colleagues, right? In the legal department. But it's been switched, and it shows something very unexpected. Something that it shows something that did happen, but they manipulated the footage and the audio to make it sound like Nick was basically involved in something that he shouldn't have been involved in. And so, basically when you see, his colleagues looking at the videotape and looking at him, Nick, he starts just freaking out and getting all flustered and panicked. And he's saying stuff like, that's not what they said. They said that, but that's not what they said then. And I said that, but I didn't say that then. Those aren't the words I said. It's that level of panic, okay? And seeing, someone like Denzel, who is usually, you're used to seeing him play a more level-headed character in the types of movies he does. And so seeing, someone like him do such a good job of showing this level of panicking and just breaking down, it's a revelation, okay? And so those are the two scenes I could think of that show just how good John Lithgow and Denzel Washington are respectively. And so yeah, it's a good revenge thriller, with a couple of good action scenes thrown in for good measure. But I will say that okay, the instances I thought were over the top were the fact that, say, I understand that the media would be following the story of Nick Stiles, because he's a prominent a figure of authority and everything. And so when it's looking like he's involved in all his corruption and everything, yeah, there's going to be a story there. But the way the movie sets it up, it makes it look like it's the most important thing in the city, or the national news or something like that. And so while yes, I'm sure it's it's a bleed, if it bleeds it leads type story. The way the movie portrays it, it makes it look like it's the most important thing of the nation, and something like that. And so that I was kind of like, that there's more newsworthy things that would make it national news, right? And so So yeah, so that I had a hard time swallowing. Like, not to say that I didn't think that there'd be any sort of publicity for a story like that whatsoever, because obviously, I mean, yeah, this would be a newsworthy event, but the news coverage you do see makes it look like it's the most groundbreaking news story of the 90s. And so that part I thought was kind of over the top. And I understand that there's going to be a focus on that because that's the story of the movie. Okay, I understand that, but and because in some respects, the movie does a good job of covering other events when they're trying to establish how much time's passed. Like in the 80s, like when in the scenes that are supposed to be set in the 80s, you hear news stories on the radio about Ronald Reagan and whatever's going on with politics at the time. And then when it's going into the 90s, you hear about certain events that happened in the 90s. And so it's like that other news stories are going on, but just from what you do see of the media in this movie and how much attention they give to the story of Nick Stiles, that's where you're kind of like, isn't there anything else, going on here, in the news? But also, I understand that in some respects they were trying to go for kind of like a dark satire of politics and the media, in the sense of showing just how quickly certain friends and colleagues turned on Nick, when it looked like he was involved in some shady stuff. But I thought that some of these people, they turned on him way too easily, because, this is a guy who, this is a character who's clearly established as someone who's a morally upright individual. And, he's got, his record speaks for itself, And so when Blake hatches this scheme and, starts making it look like Nick's involved in all these horrible things, you would expect some of these people who, have known Nick for all these years to, basically be more in his corner. At least Larry, his partner, was, Kevin Pollak's character. He was in his corner. He knows that something's up, but he's not about to believe that, Nick's doing all these things, he doesn't believe that Blake's, still alive, but he also doesn't believe that Nick's, really doing all these, horrible things. And also, I gotta say, though, I will say that I did like, the character of Alice, Nick's wife, as played by Victoria Dillard. And, she does a good job of, showing someone who's under duress, in the sense that, her, husband, is now, first her husband's, gone missing, and then, he's returned and everything, but then it starts to look like he's, doing all these horrible things this whole time. And, and when she starts to, you understand why, she starts to have the thoughts that she does about him, because, some of the stuff that Blake, has done to Nick, it makes it look like, Nick's doing something behind his wife's back, and so you understand Alice's, questioning of Nick's character and what have you. So, that at least made some sense. But it's like all these other people, though, it just, I felt like the dark satire could have been done a little better, like maybe if there'd been a bit more gradual sense of betrayal, I think it would have been stronger. But as it comes across in the movie, all these people suddenly just turning on Nick just like that comes across as over the top. But let's see what else. Overall, though, I think it just, a couple of over the top instances aside, I thought it was a good movie. And I think that both Denzel Washington and John Lithgow gave great performances in it, and like I said, it elevated what probably would have been a decent movie at best into something that was actually a good movie. And so I'm going to go ahead and give Ricochet 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good movie, good, revenge thriller. And, the DVD, unfortunately, it's bare bones. It's one of those old school DVDs that, you got your jump to a scene, cast bios, languages and subtitles. That's it. And I wish that that they would re-release this, like say on Blu-ray or something, or at the very least, I wish that they had put this maybe on a re-release on a DVD that had special features or something, because this is actually a good movie, and considering the turning point and some of the careers of the people that were involved in this movie, you think that this would be worth an update as far as say having some special features. But one other thing I'll say about the movie, there is a score by Alan Silvestri, who's a good composer, but while it's overall a good score, it does tend to rip off his own score for the movie Predator, and so that is something that I was going to touch on, but I kind of forgot about it. But that's the one other thing I could think of. But other than that, though, other than the factors I mentioned, this is a good movie. So Ricochet, 4 out of 5 stars. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. And you all have a good night. Take care. Bye.